The bar was dim, lit by the low hum of amber bulbs, strung like lazy fireflies across the exposed brick ceiling. It smelled of cedar, old bourbon, and the ghost of laughter that hadn't died in decades. The Velvet Fox didn't belong in Manhattan anymore, not with the glass towers and avocado toast cafes swallowing the old city whole. But it remained, a stubborn thing, nestled between a designer handbag shop and a meditation studio that charged $300 a session. Damon Thorne hated it. He hated the cramped space, the chipped wooden bar, the way the floorboards groaned under his $2,000 shoes. But most of all, he hated that it was still open. He had offered 3 times its worth. 3 times. And still no deal. The bartender stood with her back to him, pouring amber liquid with a kind of practiced grace that didn't belong to someone barely 30. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, tendrils curling down her neck, and her arms were bare smooth, strong, freckled from the sun. "Riley Quinn," Damon said coolly, adjusting the cuff of his slate-gray suit. She turned, unimpressed. "Ah. The corporate reaper returns." He didn't flinch. "We have unfinished business." "We really don't," she said, sliding a glass across to a grizzled regular who nodded in thanks. "You offered. I refused. Story ends." "It ends when I say it does." Riley cocked her head, her smile slow and merciless. "See? That's your problem. You think money writes the endings." Damon's jaw tightened. He had built an empire out of nothing from a childhood spent dodging eviction notices to Forbes covers by 35. He knew how to bend the world. He knew how to win. But Riley Quinn? She didn't play the game. She upended the board. "I came to raise my offer," he said, voice calm but clipped. $12 million. I'll wire it by morning. You can start a new life. A new bar. Anywhere." Her eyes flashed green, bright, dangerous. "You think this is about money? This bar's been in my family since Prohibition. My grandfather poured drinks during the blackout. My mom met my dad right over there. He was drunk and she wasn't impressed. This place is bones and breath. You can't buy that." He studied hair. "Everything has a price." Riley leaned forward on her elbows, close enough for him to catch the faint scent of orange peel and spiced rum. Her voice dropped, velvet over steel. "Then you're poorer than I thought." The words didn't slap. They sliced clean and cold. Damon reached into his jacket and placed a slim manila envelope on the bar. "Final offer. Think wisely." She didn't even glance at it. Instead, she picked up a bottle of 30-year Macallan, rare, expensive, and likely older than she was, and poured a glass. Then, with theatrical care, she picked it up. "For you," she said sweetly. Damon reached for it, and then she threw it in his face. Gasps rippled from the few patrons still lingering at the bar. Damon blinked, whiskey stinging his eyes, his $1,000 shirt soaking dark. "Oops," Riley said, not sounding sorry at all. "My hand must have slipped." Silence. Then laughter. From a booth. From the old man by the jukebox. From a couple on their 3rd date. Damon stood stock still, humiliated. This had never happened. Not once. He was the predator in every room. The one with power, control, dominance. But Riley. She turned her back on him. Dismissed him like a waiter without a tip. He should have walked away. Burned the bar to the ground with legal fire. Called his lawyer. Called the health inspector. Called God. But he just stared. And then, quietly, Damon Thorne laughed. Not loud. Not pleasant. But low and dangerous. Like a match struck too close to gasoline. He picked up the envelope dripping with single malt and tucked it back inside his jacket. And then he said just loud enough for her to hear, "You'll regret this." Riley glanced back at him, eyebrow raised. "Doubt it." Then she winked, and Damon left. But something about the way the firelight danced on her skin, or the way she didn't flinch at power, stayed with him longer than the sting of whiskey, longer than the shame. She was trouble, the kind you didn't forget. And Damon Thorne? He didn't lose. Damon's town car sliced through Manhattan like a silver blade, but his mind remained fixed on the Velvet Fox. The scent of that aged Macallan still clung to his shirt collar, soaked into his skin like a bruise. He stared out the tinted window at the glittering skyline, fists clenched in his lap. He'd been rejected before by boardrooms, by markets, by his own father when he was 13 and too soft to survive. But not like this. Not publicly. Not with laughter ringing in his ears. The problem wasn't just the embarrassment. It was her. Riley Quinn had looked him straight in the eye and told him, without a flicker of hesitation, that he couldn't buy what he wanted. That she wasn't for sale. That truth, that fire, it wasn't just infuriating. It was compelling. He should have crushed her. But all he could think about was the way her lips curled when she smiled like she knew a secret. How her voice lingered in the space between sarcasm and seduction. Control the narrative, he told himself. Redirect the energy. Reclaim power. He tapped his watch. Called Jack. His assistant's voice crackled through the Bluetooth. Yes, Mr. Thorne? Pull everything we have on Riley Quinn. Background, finances, family, social. I want it yesterday. Jack hesitated. Sire. You're not planning something illegal, right? Damon's voice dropped to a glacial whisper. I'm planning to win. Riley locked up the bar just after 2. The street was empty, rain-slicked, glinting with the occasional flash of a passing taxi. She leaned against the old brick doorway, lighting a cigarette she never planned to finish. Her hands trembled just slightly. Not from fear, from adrenaline. She'd faced down Wall Street's golden god, and survived. But why didn't it feel like a win? The moment his eyes met hers after the whiskey hit not rage, not shock, but that dark, amused smile. It rattled her. Damon Thorne wasn't just any suit. He was carved from glass and shadow, and she'd poked at something beneath that perfect surface. Idiot, she muttered. You don't throw whiskey at sharks. They bite back. Still, $1 million offer? That wasn't just business. That was personal. No one paid that kind of money unless something more was at stake. And Riley Quinn knew power when she saw it. She'd spent her childhood watching her mother scrub floors in penthouses where women wore diamonds to breakfast. That was the world Damon came from, and the world that had always kept Riley firmly on the outside. She exhaled a shaky breath, flicked her cigarette into the gutter, and walked home with her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets, trying not to imagine what it might have been like even just for a second to take the money, to walk away, to stop drowning. The next morning came with rain and resentment. Riley was behind the bar before noon, sleeves rolled up, prepping for a private party. Her brother Liam's hospital bills were late again, the roof was leaking, and business had been slow. But she'd be damned if she sold out. Not to him. She was halfway through slicing limes when the door creaked open. She didn't look up. We're closed till 3. Then consider this a private meeting. Her knife froze mid-cut. That voice, that arrogant calm, that polished, perfect confidence. Riley looked up. Damon stood in the doorway. Rain on his coat collar. Dark hair. Just damp enough to look devastating. He stepped inside like he owned the air itself. You're early, she said flatly. You're stubborn, he replied. And you're a walking cliché. What do you want now? Round 2? No. He stepped closer. A different offer. She folded her arms. You just can't take a hint, can you? This isn't about the bar. She blinked. Then what? I need a fiancé. Silence. The words hung in the room like perfume and poison. I'm sorry, what? She asked, half laughing, half stunned. He pulled a black leather folder from his coat. Inside, a typed agreement, signature line blank. You play the role. Appear with me at public events. Keep up the charade for 6 weeks. Then you walk away with $1 million, untaxed. She stared at him like he'd grown horns. You want me, she said slowly, to fake an engagement with you. For cash? Yes. Why? Damon didn't blink. Conservative investors. They don't trust men who don't look stable. Marriage suggests permanence. Security. Morality. She let out a low whistle. So you want me to dress up, kiss you in front of cameras, and pretend to love the man who tried to gut my family's legacy? Yes. Riley walked around the bar slowly, eyes sharp. "And why me, Damon? Why the girl who embarrassed you in front of a dozen witnesses? Because you're the only one who'd never fall for me." There it was, the truth, bare and brutal. He needed someone who wouldn't want more. Someone immune. Riley's lips curved. Not quite a smile. Not quite forgiveness. $1 million. "Yes. I'll think about it," she said. She turned away. And for the second time in 2 days, Riley Quinn walked off, leaving Damon Thorne standing in her wake wet, humiliated, and aching for something he hadn't even named yet. Chapter 2. $1 million proposal. Damon hated waiting. He built an empire by moving first, cutting fast, and never giving people time to think. Hesitation was the language of the weak. And yet, for the first time in years, he was waiting. 3 days had passed since his proposal, not of love, but of convenience. A fake engagement, inked in zeros. He'd expected Riley Quinn to call immediately, or slam the door in his face. She did neither. Now, seated in the corner of a sleek midtown office, Damon stared at his untouched espresso. His team spoke around him numbers, projections, risk factors, but all he could think about was her voice, low and amused, saying, "I'll think about it." He wasn't used to being thought about. He was used to yes or no, not maybe. And certainly not maybe, if I feel like it. "Mr. Thorne?" Jack, his assistant, broke the silence. "About the Harrow deal." "Push the meeting," Damon said sharply. Jack blinked. "It's the closing, sir." "Then delay the close." Damon stood, grabbing his coat. "I have a bar to visit." The rain had finally stopped, but the city still dripped with the aftertaste of gray skies. When Damon stepped into the Velvet Fox, the air hit him like memory, dark wood, warm lights, and a hint of citrus from the slices drying on the counter. Riley was on a stool near the window, reading a dog-eared paperback and sipping coffee from a chipped mug. No makeup, no heels, no performance. She looked maddeningly real. "I expected you yesterday," she said without looking up. "I don't like being ignored." "Then you picked the wrong woman." She closed the book and turned to him. "Still want a fiancée?" "Yes." She studied him. "And if I say no, you walk away a bartender with bills, a broken roof, and a brother who needs better treatment than Medicaid provides." His words weren't cruel. They were exact. Clinical. But they hit like shrapnel. Riley's eyes narrowed, and her voice was soft but razor-edged. "Did you dig through my life, Damon? Was that your plan B after the whiskey bath didn't work?" "Yes." Her breath caught for a second. "Just a second. You're a cold bastard." "I'm honest." "You deserve honesty." "No," she said. "You deserve respect." A tense beat passed. Then, slowly, she stood and walked behind the bar, retrieving a bottle of mid-range scotch and 2 glasses. She poured, pushed one toward him. "All right," Riley said. "Here are my terms." Damon sat. "No sex. No touching unless it's public. No overnight visits unless required. No surprises. And if I break the rules, I walk." With the full amount, Damon gave a slow nod. "Add it to the contract." "I already did." She reached below the counter and pulled out a marked-up copy of his original agreement, red ink, sarcastic margin notes, and a post-it on the front that read, "Try not to be an ass." His lips twitched, almost a smile. "Efficient. Don't thank me. I still don't like you. But you'll fake love me." She downed her scotch in one gulp. "I'll fake the hell out of it." Later that night, Riley stared at her bedroom ceiling, contract signed and sealed in her nightstand. The money would hit her account in the morning. $1 million. Enough to save the bar, pay off Liam's medical debt, fix the plumbing, even restart college if she wanted. And all she had to do was pretend to love a man she loathed. Easy. Except it wasn't. Because when Damon had looked at her, truly looked, there had been something lonely there. Not soft, not weak, just hollow. As if beneath the custom suits and glass empire, he was a man who'd never been chosen for him. "Don't romanticize the paycheck," she warned herself. "You're not one of those girls." but a whisper in her gut said otherwise. Meanwhile, in his penthouse high above Park Avenue, Damon Thorne poured himself a drink and stared at the flickering city lights. Riley Quinn, bartender, mouth like a blade, eyes like trouble, was officially his fiancée. On paper, at least. He should have felt victorious, strategic, in control. But instead, Damon felt something foreign, something dangerous. Anticipation. The contract was signed. The deal was real. But the first official event on their schedule, a high-profile charity gala hosted by the Astor Foundation, felt anything but fake. Riley stood in front of a full-length mirror inside the penthouse dressing suite, clutching the side of her satin gown like a lifeline. The deep emerald green hugged her curves like a whisper and bared more back than she was used to outside a swimsuit. Her dark auburn hair had been swept into a soft updo by a stylist who looked like she belonged in Vogue. She barely recognized herself. "Are you sure this isn't too much?" she muttered, shifting uncomfortably in her heels. "It's perfect," Damon said from the doorway. He leaned against the frame in a tuxedo that looked tailored by gods. Crisp, black, devastating. His jaw was clean-shaven, his hair just tousled enough to look unintentional, and his gaze was cool but lingering. Riley turned, eyeing him with a skeptical smirk. "I didn't peg you for a bow tie kind of guy." He took a slow step forward. "I didn't peg you for a woman who'd say yes. I said yes to a paycheck, not to you." He smiled, a faint, unreadable thing. "Either way, the effect is the same." She grabbed her clutch, ignoring the way her heart gave a traitorous thump. "Remind me again what the point of this little soiree is?" "To be seen," Damon said. "With me. On my arm. Smiling like you mean it." Riley gave a theatrical sigh. "Right. Modern love in the time of billionaires." The gala was held at the Metropolitan Club, all marble, chandeliers, and suffocating old money. The room buzzed with silk gowns, champagne flutes, and conversations sharpened like steak knives. Riley hated it instantly. But Damon was a different man here, gliding through the space like a shark in still water. He nodded once, and investors flocked. He said nothing, and people listened. The air bent around him like gravity, and she was part of that now. "Riley Quinn," he introduced, hand sliding to the small of her back. "My fiancée." She'd heard that word before, but never like this, never said, with such calculated cool, like a move in a chess game. Her stomach twisted, but she smiled, held his arm tighter. "Charmed," she said to a silver-haired woman in pearls. "I do my best not to domesticate him." Laughter bubbled. Damon's grip tightened briefly, almost approving. For 2 hours, they moved through the crowd like a performance, a perfectly executed illusion. Riley played the doting partner, laughed at the right moments, brushed her hand along his lapel when eyes were on them. She hated every second of it, and hated how good she was at it even more, until he leaned down, mouth just by her ear. "You're better at this than I anticipated." His breath brushed warm against her skin. She turned slightly. "You say that like it's a compliment." "It is." Riley swallowed. Her heart thudded a little too hard. And then came the moment. The kiss. Planned. Public. Strategically timed. He turned to her, eyes intense but unreadable. She tilted her chin up. His hand cradled her jaw, thumb brushing just below her cheekbone, a tender, practiced gesture. And then he kissed her. It was supposed to be brief, polite, businesslike. It wasn't. His lips were warm and sure, but gentle at first, just a brush, as if asking permission, and then deeper, slower, until Riley forgot the crowd, the cameras, the fake diamond on her finger. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, leaning into him, fingers clutching his lapel like she needed to anchor herself. By the time they broke apart, the air between them was thick and humming. "Good?" she whispered, trying not to breathe too hard. "Convincing," Damon said smoothly, but his voice was lower than before. A little rough. And Riley couldn't remember the last time she'd wanted to slap someone and kiss them again in the same breath. Later, in the car, silence sat between them like an unspoken dare. "You didn't have to kiss me like that," she said finally, arms crossed. He looked out the window. "Would you rather it felt fake?" It wasn't supposed to feel like anything. Damon turned to her then, and his voice lost all pretense. You kissed me back. I played the part. You melted into it. Riley scoffed and looked away, but her chest was tight. One kiss. That's all it took to blur the first rule they set. No emotions. No touching unless it's for show. And yet, they were both too good at pretending, or maybe not pretending enough. That night, Riley stood alone on the penthouse balcony, the city glittering like spilled stars beneath her. She hugged her coat tighter around her shoulders and tried to ignore the way her lips still tingled. The money was real. The game was on. But the rules? Already broken at the seams. Chapter 3. Wearing the mask. The next morning, Riley woke up earlier than usual, a restless buzz under her skin. Not the hangover she expected, but something far more inconvenient. Anticipation. She stared at the bracelet on her wrist. Silva, simple. Cold. It should have felt like a chain. Instead, it felt like a whisper, subtle, intimate, threaded with tension she couldn't name. You're a prop in a business deal, she reminded herself. He's a shark in a designer suit. Don't mistake his polish for affection. Still, her fingers lingered on the engraved initials, R and D. Fake couple. Real friction. By 10 a.m. Riley was being swept into a whirlwind of designer fittings and photography prep for a feature in Modern Legacy, a lifestyle magazine for the elite, and Damon's latest PR strategy. Smile, the photographer chirped. You're in love, remember? Riley curled her lips into a soft, knowing grin and leaned into Damon on the cream velvet settee. His arm draped along the back behind her shoulders, casual but close enough that her bare skin tingled under his fingertips. They were dressed like a fantasy. He in charcoal gray with cufflinks that gleamed like promises. She in white silk, her legs draped over his lap in a daringly elegant pose that had been the photographer's idea, though Damon didn't object. The camera clicked. Flash. Another pose. Another curated moment for a world that wanted to believe in power couples and fairy tales. Between shots, Riley sipped a mimosa and muttered under her breath. This whole thing feels like an extremely expensive lie. Damon didn't look at her, just adjusted his watch. That's because it is. And you're okay with that? Perception is leverage. I don't need it to be true, I need it to be effective. She eyed him. Do you ever believe in anything that isn't transactional? A pause. His jaw ticked. No, he said simply, but the glance he gave her then sharp, searching, almost lonely, made her wonder if that was entirely true. After the shoot, Damon led her into one of his town cars waiting curbside. No work today? She asked. I cleared the afternoon, he said. There's someone I want you to meet. Oh no, she groaned. Not parent. Damon's smile was brief. I don't have any. She blinked, startled. Oh. Dead, he added after a pause. Years ago. No tragic backstory. Just facts. Riley nodded. She didn't press. But the admission stayed with her. They drove to the Upper West Side, where Damon's godmother, Margot Lane, a philanthropist and socialite with enough power to terrify senators, hosted her weekly garden brunch. Margot was statuesque and severe in the way only women of inherited wealth could be, all pearls, perfectly sculpted gray hair, and the kind of cheekbones that looked like legacy. But when she greeted Riley, something shifted. You're prettier than I expected, Margot said, eyes twinkling. And taller. Likewise, Riley quipped. Margot laughed. I like her. They sat in the garden beneath a wisteria-covered pergola, sipping lavender iced tea and nibbling on absurdly delicate tea sandwiches. Riley played her part to perfection. Charming, curious, slightly irreverent. And Margot seemed delighted. She's disarming, Margot said to Damon after Riley excused herself to the powder room. That's good for you. You've been too tightly wound for too long. Damon didn't respond. He was watching the garden path where Riley had vanished. His thumb grazing the lip of his glass. Margot leaned in. You know she's not like the others. She's not supposed to be like anything. Still, be careful. Pretending to love someone is a dangerous game. His eyes snapped to hers. I'm not pretending. Margot arched a brow. Then you're already in trouble. That night, Back at the penthouse, Riley peeled off her shoes and curled her toes into the plush cream rug of the living room. She was exhausted emotionally, physically, performatively. Her whole day had been a performance, and yet, somewhere in it, something had started to feel less false. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Damon loosening his tie. "You were good today," he said. She shrugged. "I'm always good." His lips quirked. "Margot liked you. She threatened to rearrange your entire estate plan if you messed this up. She meant it." They shared a soft laugh, a rare moment of ease. Then a silence settled. Not awkward. Not tense. But thick with the weight of something shifting. "Why me, Damon?" she asked finally. "Why not an actress or some family friend who already knows how to play rich?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. "Honest. Because I needed someone who didn't care who I was, who wouldn't flatter me, or want things from me I didn't know how to give." Her breath caught. "And," he added, "because the night you threw that whiskey in my face, I didn't feel like a goddamn machine. I felt something." First time in years, Riley stared at him, stunned into silence. It was the first time he'd told her the real reason, and it cracked something in her. She stepped toward him, slowly, not to kiss him, not to blur the line, just to be close. "You're still not getting sex," she murmured, teasing on the surface, but her voice had softened. "I know," he replied, but there was no smugness in it. Just longing, unspoken, quiet, real. Chapter 4. Storm at the Estate. Riley Quinn had never seen this much quiet. The car wound through tree-lined roads that opened into the kind of estate you only saw in movies, sprawling acres, manicured hedges, and a mansion that seemed more sculpted than built. The Thorne estate sat nestled on the edge of the Hamptons, staring arrogantly out over the Atlantic, where the ocean gnawed at the shore like it was owed something. "This isn't a house," she muttered as they pulled into the circular driveway. "It's a Bond villain's lair." Damon smirked. "Would that make you the femme fatale?" "Please. I'm the sarcastic barmaid who throws whiskey at the villain and gets killed off in Act 1. She stepped out of the car, heels crunching on gravel. The salty air curled around her like fingers, cool and biting. Somewhere far out on the horizon, thunder growled. Inside, the house was all clean lines and soft grays, warmth hidden under layers of elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out on a storm-colored sea. Sculptures lined the halls like frozen thoughts. Everything was intentional, controlled. Just like Damon. "Why are we here again?" Riley asked, trailing her fingers along the marble banister as he led her upstairs. "Quarterly board retreat," he said. "They expect my fiancée to make an appearance. They also expect me to appear human. And dragging me into your haunted seaside estate is your idea of humanizing?" He gave her a side glance. "You disarm people. I offend people. Same effect, just with better results." The weekend schedule was filled with formal dinners, charity meetings, and one particularly agonizing brunch with investors' wives who spoke about crystal healing and designer foie gras. But tonight, the first night, was quiet. Just them, the storm, and the sound of the house breathing around them. After dinner, Riley wandered the halls barefoot, a glass of wine in hand, the echo of the sea tapping at the windows like it was trying to get in. She found herself drawn to the far wing, the quietest part of the estate. At the end of a long corridor hung a painting that stopped her cold. It was stark, a man's silhouette walking away from a crumbling city, shoulders bowed, sky bleeding in hues of dusk and loneliness. She stepped closer. Something about it tugged at her ribcage. "You painted that," she said softly, sensing him behind her before he spoke. "Yes." She turned. Damon leaned in the doorway, dress shirt unbuttoned at the throat, sleeves rolled up, barefoot like her. Not polished, not armored. Just a man. "You don't strike me as the tortured artist type. I don't show that side. I didn't ask if you showed it. I said you had it." Their eyes held. The storm outside cracked, low and distant. "I used to paint all the time," he said finally. "Before the company, before the press and boardrooms, when it was just survival. And now? Now it's too honest. Riley moved toward him, slowly, carefully, not seducing. Just seeing. "You hide behind this life," she said gently. "Behind steel and money and cold rooms. And you hide behind sarcasm and more sarcasm." She smiled. Touché. Another rumble of thunder. A power shift not in money, not in posture but in silence. In who they were when no one was watching. "You don't have to entertain me," Damon said. "This weekend is just optics. No expectations." Riley stepped past him, brushing his shoulder, heat, electric and fast. She didn't stop walking. "Who says I'm not the one expecting something?" Later, the storm finally broke. Rain pelted the windows in sheets. Wind shrieked down the chimney. Riley sat curled up on the library's chaise lounge, dressed in one of Damon's oversized sweaters she'd stolen from the guest closet, legs bare, wineglass in hand. She looked like something soft had wandered into a world built for sharpness. Damon entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. He offered one. Their fingers brushed brief. "Hot. Careful. Chamomile?" she said. "How scandalous." He didn't sit. He stood at the fireplace, watching the flames like they might accuse him of something. "I never bring people here," he said. "Not friends. Not women. Not even most of my family. You think that'll scare me?" "No," he said. "But it scares me." That stilled her. She set down the mug and stood. The space between them collapsed, like it had always been temporary. She touched his jaw. Gently. "You hide it well," she said. "But you're starving." His breath hitched. His hand found her hip, tentative. "I told you the rules," she whispered. He nodded. "You said no sex. No touching." "Yeah," she said. "I also said no emotions." Then she kissed him. The kiss started slow. A question in the dark, answered not with words but with heat. Riley's lips pressed to Damon's with unexpected softness, not the sharp, defensive woman he'd come to expect, but someone peeling back her armor 1 inch at a time. And Damon? Damon responded like a man who had waited far too long to feel something real. His hand slid to her jaw, thumb grazing her cheek as he deepened the kiss. "He didn't take?" he asked, and that broke her more than force ever could. The storm outside howled louder, like the sky itself wanted in. They pulled apart just enough to breathe. Riley's voice was husky. "Still strictly business?" Damon searched her eyes, all fire and hesitation, and for once, he didn't calculate. Didn't measure the cost. "No," he said. "Not tonight." She kissed him again. Clothes dropped like breadcrumbs down the hallway to his room, her oversized sweater, his open shirt, her underwear tangled in his slacks. They were both half laughing, half trembling by the time they collapsed into his bed. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate. A collision of want and denial, a silent scream turned into skin and mouths and hands gripping too tightly. Damon kissed down her collarbone like he was mapping her. Riley clutched his back like he might vanish. She didn't think. She felt. And for a man who built walls with blueprints, Damon tore them down with a single gasp of her name. There was no room for games. No room for roles. Just breath and touch and the terrifying realization that they weren't pretending anymore. Later, wrapped in sheets that still smelled like rain and desire, Riley lay on her side, watching the rise and fall of Damon's chest. He hadn't fallen asleep. She could tell. "You okay?" she asked softly. He didn't open his eyes. "I shouldn't have let that happen." Riley's body stiffened. "Regret already? That might be a personal best." "No." He opened his eyes and turned toward her. "Not regret. I just don't know what this means." She sat up, the sheet slipping down her back. "It doesn't have to mean anything." "Liar," he said gently. Her heart skipped. "You meant it," he added. "Every sound. Every kiss. You weren't playing a part." She swallowed. "Neither were you." Silence fell between them, not heavy, but tentative. Like the space between waves, right before one crashes. Finally, Riley rose and gathered her clothes. "Where are you going?" Damon asked, his voice quiet. "Back to the guest room. If I wake up next to you, we'll pretend it didn't happen. And I'm not good at pretending when things do." He didn't stop her. Didn't say stay. But as she left, she felt his eyes on her, not hungry, not possessive. Haunted. Riley barely slept. Every creak in the old house sounded louder, every gust of wind more personal. She lay on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell things had spiraled so fast. One kiss. One night. $1 million contract that didn't mention what to do when feelings blurred the lines. She thought of his painting again, the lonely man walking away from a city falling apart. She understood it now. Understood him more than she wanted to. He didn't fear chaos. He feared connection. Because connection meant something to lose. Morning arrived, gray and too bright. Riley dressed in silence and found her way to the kitchen, the smell of coffee already thick in the air. Damon was at the counter in a navy cashmere sweater and dark jeans, barefoot again. Casual. Quiet. Too normal for someone who'd torn her world open the night before. Coffee? He asked without looking at her. She hesitated. Sure. He handed her a mug. Their fingers brushed. She pulled away fast. Damon didn't react. He just leaned back against the counter and took a sip. So, Riley said after a beat. About last night. No apologies, Damon said quickly. Please. She studied him. No regrets either? His jaw tightened. Only that it complicates things. Everything about us is complicated. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the swirling cream in his mug. Then maybe we stop pretending it's not. She raised an eyebrow. You want to change the rules? I want to stop lying to ourselves. Riley exhaled a short laugh. Damon, that's cute, but we started as a lie. Doesn't mean it has to stay that way. For the first time since the deal began, his voice wasn't cool. It cracked at the edges, raw and exposed. Riley stepped closer, lowering her voice. I need to know this isn't just about you getting bored of faking it. That it's not just some power shift, because I broke a rule. It's not power, he said. It's something I can't buy. Something you didn't offer but gave anyway. Her chest ached. Then, say it, she whispered. Say it's real. Damon looked at her, not the crowd-ready version of her, but the one with flaws and fury and a bruised heart she'd never let anyone touch. I want you, Riley. Not the act. Not the cover story. You. And just like that, the storm broke again. This time, inside her. Chapter 5. Morning Regrets. The sun crept through gauzy curtains, turning the Thorne estate gold around the edges. But the warmth didn't reach the man standing alone in the master bedroom, shirtless, expression unreadable. Damon stared out the window toward the sea, one hand resting on the cool glass, the other clenching at his side like it had forgotten how to let go. He had made a mistake. Not sleeping with her. Feeling something. He had broken the most important rule of all. Never blur the line between need and want. Riley didn't knock when she walked into the kitchen later that morning, already dressed, hair still damp from a quick shower. Her eyes were sharp but unreadable, and the tension between them thrummed like an electric wire pulled too tight. You didn't come find me, she said evenly. You told me not to. I also kissed you first. He didn't flinch. What do you want me to say, Riley? That I had a good time? That I want to do it again? Because I do. But I also think we just blew a hole in the foundation of a very expensive, very fragile deal. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. So we pretend it didn't happen? If that's what it takes. A long pause. Then she smiled slow and bitter. Wow. You're good. Good at what? At pretending you didn't care. He didn't respond. And that silence, that damn perfectly poised silence, hit her harder than if he'd yelled. Riley grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water, every motion too deliberate, too calm. I'm not asking you for a relationship, Damon, she said. But don't insult me by pretending you felt nothing. I never said that. No. You just acted like it. She set the glass down too hard. The sound cracked through the room. I'm going for a walk, she muttered. Try not to rehearse your lines too hard before the brunch. She didn't wait for a reply. And Damon didn't offer one. Outside, the ocean air tasted sharp and bitter. Riley walked barefoot across the wet grass, letting the salt and cold sting her into clarity. She had known better. She had drawn the rules. She'd said new sex, new feelings, new risk. And still, she'd fallen into his bed like a girl chasing a dream. But she wasn't that girl. She couldn't afford to be. This was a game, a contract, a performance. She'd just let her heart forget. For a few hours, she'd believed he looked at her like a man who saw her, not a prop, not a problem, but a woman he wanted beyond strategy. But in the light of morning, all she saw in his eyes was retreat. It cut deeper than she wanted to admit. By the time brunch began, the air between them had cooled to a business-casual chill. Riley wore pale blue chiffon and the silver bracelet. Her smile was flawless. Her laugh was timed. Her eyes were guarded. Damon played his part, too. Hand at her waist. Light touches. Public warmth. Private silence. The guests cooed and complimented, amused by her wit and charmed by their chemistry. No one saw the jagged edges underneath. Until Margot Lane, Damon's godmother, sharper than ever in a cream silk dress, leaned in during dessert and said quietly, "You two are either very in love or very good liars." Riley sipped her mimosa. "Can't it be both?" Margot tilted her head, studying her like a painting she couldn't quite decipher. "Just be careful, dear," she said. Falling, while pretending is still falling. Later, Riley wandered the upstairs hallway and found herself again before the painting of the man walking away. Only now, she noticed something new, a second figure, just faintly visible in the background. Following him, a ghost, or maybe a warning. She didn't hear Damon approach, but she felt his presence always preceded him, like pressure in the air before a storm. "I painted her in later," he said quietly, beside her. Riley blinked. "The figure?" He nodded. She wasn't there in the original, but something about it felt unfinished. She turned toward him, careful. "You ever think she wasn't following? Maybe she was just walking away in the opposite direction." Their eyes met, and that was when Damon knew. Riley was already halfway gone. He wanted to reach for her, but his hands, those hands that had touched her so freely hours before, stayed by his sides. She waited a beat, then walked away, and this time, he didn't stop her. The rest of the weekend passed in a polite, glassy blur. Damon retreated into work mode, phone calls, email chains, barely. There, glances over breakfast. Riley smiled when expected, nodded through investor chit-chat, and perfected the art of the well-timed exit. They'd become experts at appearing perfect from the outside, a porcelain couple with hairline fractures no one could see unless they looked close. She didn't bring up the kiss, or the night, or the silence that followed. Neither did he. It was easier that way. Until Sunday evening, when a text arrived from Calder Investments, the very conservative firm Damon had claimed required his engaged status to greenlight the upcoming merger. Calder board dinner, moved to 7 p.m. Monday. Confirmed with all 5 partners. Looking forward to finalizing terms, regardless of your guest's attendance. Riley frowned. Regardless of your guest's attendance? Her stomach twisted. She read it again. And again. Then she opened Damon's laptop, which he'd left on the library desk. No password barrier and oversight, or maybe arrogance. The file was still open. Investor Behavior Study. Q. 2. 2025. She scanned it quickly, eyes darting over pie charts and bullet points. All full of the usual corporate spin, until she found it. Section 5. Public Image and Investor Perception. Contrary to outdated trends, the majority of high-net-worth investors, polled 72%, showed no measurable preference for executives who were married or engaged. Stability was more often linked to portfolio strategy and operational transparency, not personal relationships. No preference. No requirement. Riley's breath caught. The engagement had never been necessary. It had been Damon's idea. His angle. His way of securing the deal. Of controlling the narrative. Of controlling her. Her pulse roared in her ears. He didn't need a fiancée. He needed a distraction. A shield. A story to sell. And she had been foolish enough to think it might be something more. She found him in the study, staring out the window at the dust-colored sea. Tie loosened, shirt sleeves rolled up. "Tell me the truth," she said from the doorway, her voice low and shaking. He turned slowly. "About what?" She held up her phone. "Calder doesn't care about your relationship status." They never did. His face didn't change. Not right away. But she saw it, the flicker of regret. Or maybe just exposure. "I read the reports," she continued. "I saw the data. You built this whole thing around a lie." Damon's voice was calm, practiced. "It wasn't a lie. It was strategy." "No," Riley snapped, stepping into the room. "A lie is when you bend the truth to get what you want. Strategy is what you call it after you win." He said nothing. And somehow that was worse. "You didn't need a fiancé," she whispered. "You just needed a puppet. Someone loud and pretty who'd distract from the fact that you were playing both sides." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Her voice cracked. "You picked me because I humiliated you. Because I didn't want you. And that made me safe. You thought I'd never see behind the curtain. It wasn't like that. Then what was it, Damon?" Her chest heaved. What the hell was this supposed to be? He looked at her. And for once, really looked all the armor gone. "I didn't expect you," he said quietly. "I expected a headline. A photo op. Someone forgettable. And then you. Verant. You were stubborn. And smart. And impossible to predict." She stared, heart thudding, waiting for the words she needed to hear. "But," he added, voice tightening, "you agreed to the contract. You took the money. You knew what this was." There it was. The line, drawn in cold ink. Riley stepped back like he'd slapped her. Her voice was barely audible. "I thought I was more than a contract." "You are," he said quickly, stepping toward her. But she shook her head. "Don't." "Riley." "No," she cut in, breath shaking. "You don't get to say that now. You don't get to look at me like I matter when you built this whole thing to make sure I didn't." He tried to reach for her. She stepped away. And this time, she didn't just walk. She ran. Riley packed in 10 minutes. She didn't cry. Not until she reached the cab, not until the estate was far enough behind her that she couldn't see the rooftop anymore. She pressed her forehead to the window as the lights of the Hamptons faded, the bracelet still cold on her wrist. No touching. No emotions. No Elise. They had broken all three. And now, the game was over. Only the pain was real. Back at the estate, Damon stood alone in the hallway outside the guest room. The door hung open. The closet empty. The air still smelled faintly like her shampoo, citrus, and salt, and something he'd never forget. He sat on the bed and put his head in his hands. He had risked everything to win the deal, and lost the only thing that had ever made him feel like a man instead of a machine. Chapter 6. The Power Play. The cover of New York Business Weekly hit stands 2 days after Riley left. The Ice King, his firebrand fiancé. A glossy photo of Damon and Riley, wrapped in one another's arms at the art gala, gazed out from every newsstand in Manhattan. Her laugh caught mid-breath. His eyes for once warm, but the photo was a lie. And Riley Quinn was gone. Damon Thorne didn't cancel meetings. He didn't reschedule boardrooms or adjust his calendar for anyone. But this week, he'd pushed back 2 acquisitions and locked himself in his corner office more than once, brooding, unreachable. Jack, his assistant, knocked gently on the open door. "Sir, you've got the Stark Investor Review in 20 minutes. Damon didn't look up. "Postpone it." Jack cleared his throat. "You've already rescheduled it once. They're getting anxious. Let them wait." His voice was low, calm, dangerous. Jack hesitated. "Should I take down the press photos in the conference room?" Damon finally looked up, eyes sharp as glass. "No. Leave them." "But she's part of this." Jack nodded quickly and backed out. The door clicked shut with a softness that felt like defeat. Across town, the Velvet Fox was packed. Word had spread. The infamous bartender turned billionaire's fiancé was back behind the bar, slinging cocktails and sarcasm like nothing had changed. Riley moved with mechanical grace. "Pour. Shake. Serve. Smile. Her hands knew what to do, even if her heart had gone off script. The bar's regulars were protective, curious, but mostly silent. Only her best friend, Danny, dared to ask. "So, Damon Thorne, you guys eloping or assassinating each other?" Riley gave a tired laugh. "Neither. The show's over." Danny slid a tequila across to her. "Did he hurt you?" Riley didn't answer. Just downed the shot and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "He lied," she said finally, "and I let him." Danny reached for her hand. "What are you going to do?" Riley stared at the liquor shelf, eyes unfocused. "Get him out of my system," she said. "The same way I would any poison. 1 hour, 1 breath, 1 shift at a time." The next morning, Damon stood in front of the Thorne Industries board composed of men and women who respected power more than decency. They hadn't seen him flinch in a decade. Until now. The chairman, Whitman Lang, arched a snow-white brow. "We heard Miss Quinn's been seen back at her bar." Damon's jaw ticked. "And?" "She was a useful asset," Whitman said. "Now she's a liability." A younger board member leaned forward. "Social media sentiment is mixed. People are speculating. Engagement status unknown. If you lose your personal narrative now, the Calder deal might—" "It won't," Damon snapped. Silence fell. Whitman steepled his fingers. "If the engagement is over, we suggest managing the fallout." Quietly, Damon stood. His voice was like ice breaking over stone. "I'm not managing her. She's not a prop. She's a person." Several brows lifted. Damon adjusted his cufflink slowly, deliberately. "I made this deal. I built this company. And I'll finish this merger. Without dragging someone who gave me more honesty than any of you ever have." Then he walked out, no further explanation, no apology. And for the first time in years, his board didn't follow him. They just watched, because something had cracked, and they weren't sure if it was him or the fortress he'd spent his life building. That night, Riley stayed late at the bar. She'd sent everyone home, even Danny. The place was quiet now, bathed in warm amber light, the smell of cedar and bitters comforting in its familiarity. She sat on a bar stool and stared at her phone. Damon hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't fought for her, and she hated how much that still hurt. She reached for the silver bracelet on her wrist, the one he'd given her for appearances. Still cold. Still engraved. R and D. It should have meant nothing. But her fingers didn't move to take it off. Across the city, Damon stood on his penthouse balcony, wind slicing through his shirt like pennants. He'd walked away from women before. He'd buried betrayal, silenced heartbreak, taught himself to breathe through pain like it was strategy. But Riley was different. Because for once, he didn't want to win. He just wanted her back. Not as a performance, not as a lie, but as the woman who saw him and kissed him anyway. It started with a headline. Quinn crashes gala. Former fiancée faces Thorne, amid split rumors. It wasn't accurate. Riley hadn't crashed anything. She'd been invited by the gallery's director, a regular at the Velvet Fox, who still believed she and Damon were Manhattan's most magnetic couple. It was a charity benefit for youth arts. Ironically appropriate, given the art piece that had first softened her to him. A lonely silhouette beneath a burning skyline. Riley hadn't expected Damon to be there, but she should have. His company was one of the event's primary sponsors. Of course he was here. Of course he was wearing that navy tux with the slight sheen that made him look like sin bottled in silk. Of course he was standing in the middle of the crowd like he owned the air itself. But what he didn't expect, what stopped him mid-conversation with an investor, was her. Riley, in a black satin dress that clung like temptation and armor. Lips blood-red, chin high, eyes unreadable. She looked like she hadn't missed him at all. Which, of course, meant she had. Damon took one step forward and stopped. Because Riley was already walking away. The cocktail hour buzzed with speculation. Whispers darted from corner to corner like sparrows, fast and vicious. Isn't that his ex? Thought she was just a stunt. She's wearing his bracelet. Look. They say she went back to bartending. And he's still chasing her? God, I hope so. Damon cornered her near a Mondrian knockoff and said, low and quiet, "Why are you here?" She didn't look at him. "Public venue. I was invited. You came to make a scene." "No," she said, tilting her glass toward him. "You made a scene the moment you turned me into a narrative." He breathed in slowly. "You're still angry?" "No," she said again. "I'm done." She turned to leave. But he stepped in front of her, not blocking, not looming. Just there. "Then tell me it meant nothing." She froze. "Tell me the night at the estate meant nothing," he said. Voice low, cracking. "Tell me you faked every sound, every breath, every kiss." "Don't," she said. "You don't get to weaponize intimacy." "I'm not. I'm trying to understand." "You don't get to do that now," Riley hissed, the words sharp enough to slice. "You had me. You had everything. And you still chose the deal." People were beginning to watch now. Two powerhouses arguing in whispers louder than screams. Damon's voice dropped. "I gave up the Calder deal." She blinked. "What?" "I pulled out. 2 days ago." Her pulse kicked. "You what?" He looked her dead in the eyes. "They asked me to go public with the breakup. To spin it. So I walked." Riley stared, mouth dry. "Why would you do that?" "Because I lied," he said. "To them. To you. To myself." A beat passed. And then he added, with no press around, no cameras flashing, just the truth. "I'm in love with you." It wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. But it knocked the breath from her chest. He stepped closer, softer now. "I'm in love with the woman who told me no when the world said yes. Who saw through my perfect suit and knew there was something broken underneath. I love you, Riley Quinn. And not as a headline. Not as a fiancée. But as the girl who made me feel again." She couldn't breathe. For a woman who'd built her whole life around control, sarcasm, and steel, this was a free fall. And she wasn't ready. So she whispered, "You're too late." Then she left. The next day, the press had a field day. Quinn walks out, after Thorne's declaration of love. Rehearsed or real? But Riley didn't read the headlines. She read Damon's letter. It arrived by courier that morning, no press, no fanfare. Just her name scrawled in his handwriting on the envelope. "Riley, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for one chance to prove that this time it's not a script. No contracts. No investors. No noisy. Just us. I'll be waiting at the Velvet Fox at midnight. If you don't show, I'll understand. But I'll never stop hoping. D." She read it twice. 3 times. Then she set it on the bar and waited for the clock to turn. Chapter 7. The Lie. 11:57 p.m. The Velvet Fox was nearly empty. Riley stood behind the bar, her fingers wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee she hadn't touched. The bar lights were dimmed, soft jazz bleeding from old speakers. The room thick with shadows and silence. She'd cleaned the counters twice. She kept glancing at the door, even when she told herself not to. You don't owe him this. But still she stayed. Still she waited. And then, at 12:04 a.m., he walked in. No suit. No entourage. Just Damon Thorne, in a worn black coat, hair windswept, eyes tired. Not the billionaire. Just the man. And for the first time he looked nervous. Riley's stomach tightened. He didn't speak right away. Just approached the bar and sat on the same stool he had the first night, the night she'd thrown whiskey in his face. Fitting, really. They'd started in flames. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said finally, setting the mug aside. "I wasn't sure you'd wait," he replied. Silence again, but now it wasn't sharp. It was fragile. He exhaled. "You look beautiful." "Don't start with that." "Okay." He nodded. "You look like someone I'm terrified to lose." That one landed. Hard. She leaned forward, arms braced against the bar. "If you're here to explain, to spin the lie, to frame it like strategy, don't bother. I know what I saw. I'm not spinning anything." His voice was low. "I lied. About the investors. About needing a fiancé, that part was never real. She stared at him. And everything after? Damon met her Chaze. His eyes were tired, raw. That was the only real thing I've ever had. A beat. 2. Riley's voice dropped. So why didn't you stop me from walking away? His throat worked. Because I thought I didn't deserve you. She let out a soft, bitter laugh. And you think you do now? I don't know, he said. But I know I'm willing to try. Even if it's slow, even if it takes more than an apology, I'll earn it. You can't just undo the damage, Damon. I know, and I don't forgive easily. He nodded. That's why I love you. That word again, love. It sounded less like a grand gesture this time, and more like the truth. It had always been waiting quietly in the background for one of them to finally say it out loud. I didn't mean to fall for you, he added. You were supposed to be the girl who made the papers smile. But then you laughed at my paintings. You drank my whiskey. You saw the cracks and didn't flinch. Her eyes stung, but she held his gaze. You made me feel like a job. I know, he said. That's my greatest failure. Riley stepped around the bar slowly, her heels soft on the old floorboards. She stopped just a few inches from him, arms crossed, voice trembling. I didn't want to fall, either, she admitted. But I did. And then you turned everything we built into strategy. Damon looked up at her, completely stripped of the man the world revered. No more strategy, he said. No more contracts. No more pretending. She didn't say anything. So he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, not a ring box. A check. He laid it on the bar beside them. It read, $1 million. Signed. Dated. Uncashed. I never used the money, he said. Never filed the expense. Never wired it to your account. Not because you didn't deserve it, but because it started as payment and ended as something I could never put a price on. Riley stared at it. $1 million. Useless. Just like all the numbers between them now. Her voice cracked. I didn't come here for the money. I know. You really walked away from Calder? He nodded. They gave me a choice. Publicly sever ties. Spin the story. Salvage the narrative. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. What happens to your deal? Dead. She swallowed hard. And the board? They'll survive. She hesitated. Then, finally, and what happens to us? He looked at her, slow and certain. That depends, he said. Do you still want a fake fiancé? Riley exhaled. Shaky. But something was shifting in her eyes. No, she whispered. I want the man who kissed me like I mattered, who painted loneliness and handed it to me without fear. Damon stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, but didn't touch her. Then, finally, she closed the gap. Not with a kiss, but with her fingers curled softly around his hand. Riley's fingers rested lightly in Damon's hand, not gripping, not pulling, just touching, like the first note in a new song. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Because this wasn't seduction or strategy, or some scripted moment designed to impress. This was her choosing to stay. I'm not promising anything, Riley said quietly. Not forgiveness. Not forever. Just a beginning. That's all I want, Damon said. Something real. Something honest. She studied his face, the sharp angles, the stormy eyes, the tension in his jaw he didn't even try to hide. He looked like a man who didn't expect a second chance, which made giving him one feel all the more powerful. She released his hand and stepped back. If we're doing this, there are new rules. He nodded. Name them. No lies. No omissions or strategic spin. If something affects me, I hear it from you. First, done. 2, I'm not a shadow in your life. I'm not a PR piece, and I'm not going to be reduced to a red carpet accessory. You never wear. Her brow arched. Tell that to every tabloid calling me a blue-collar distraction. His voice tightened. I'll handle them. You won't need to if you stick to Rule 3, she said, stepping closer again. This us happens in private, until we decide it's real enough to survive public scrutiny. Damon nodded slowly. And rule 4? No more checks, she said, sliding the $1,000,000 paper back across the bar toward him. If I'm going to love you, Damon Thorne, it won't be because you bought me. It'll be because you earned me. He looked down at the check. Then, without a word, he tore it in half. Then into quarters. Then let the pieces scatter across the bar like white snow. I'll earn you, he said. Every day. Riley stared at the fragments. Damn, she muttered. That was hot. Damon cracked the barest smile. They didn't kiss that night. There was no grand gesture, no sweeping declarations. Just two people sitting together in the dim light of a quiet bar, their knees brushing occasionally, the silence between them no longer cold but curious. They talked until nearly 3 a.m. About little things, her mother's lemon pie recipe, his failed attempts at sketching architecture, the scar on his shoulder from a childhood fall. About big things, betrayal, control, fear. And when he finally walked her home on foot, no driver, no black car, he didn't try to come inside. He just stood on her stoop, hands in his coat pockets, and said, "Tomorrow, I'm going to buy back the one thing I should have never tried to take from you." She blinked. "If you mean the bar, Damon, I don't want to own it," he said. "I want to restore it, reinforce it, secure it, so no one can ever threaten to tear it down again. Not even me." Her lips parted. But he wasn't done. "You love this place. It's your history, your roots, your armor. I want to honor that, not rewrite it." A beat passed. Then softly, "He might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." He smiled, real, unguarded. "I'm a fast learner." The next day, Damon walked into the office of Ellison and Vale Real Estate Development, contract in hand, lawyers in tow. He sat at the head of the table and looked the execs dead in the eye. "You're going to tear up your purchase agreement for the Velvet Fox," he said calmly. "Today." The room went still. "You can't force us." "I can buy your company," Damon said, voice like a blade sheathed in silk. "And I will. If this contract isn't voided by end of day." "But you signed it." "I signed it under the pretense of acquisition, not demolition." "You lied." "You lose." 10 minutes later, the contract was shredded. 20 minutes later, Damon walked out with full ownership. And by that evening, Riley received a brown envelope with the original deed, untouched, and a note that simply read, "It's yours." It always was. Meanwhile, the story of Damon's fallout with the Calder Group hit the news cycle spun expertly by Jack and the new PR team Damon had assembled after firing the old one. Thorne prioritizes values over valuation. Sources confirm exit from Calder deal. Was personal, not political. But for once, Damon didn't care about the headlines. He wasn't playing a role anymore. He was finally living the truth. And that truth started and ended with her. That night, Riley walked into the bar after closing and found the envelope waiting on her desk. She stared at the deed for a long time. Then she looked up at the wall where her grandfather's photo still hung, a grainy black and white shot of him pouring whiskey during a blizzard in 2072. "You'd like him," she whispered. She didn't call Damon. She just showed up at his penthouse. No makeup, no dress, just jeans, a hoodie, and a single sentence on her lips. "You want to come over for pancakes tomorrow?" He blinked. "Pancakes? I figure if we're starting over, we should do it right. With breakfast, low stakes, syrup involved." His smile bloomed slow and dangerous. "I'll bring the batter." Chapter 8. What He Lost. Damon had never been in a kitchen at 8 a.m. Not for breakfast, not for small talk, not for anything that didn't involve contracts, market reports, or damage control. But here he was, standing in Riley's kitchen, mismatched mugs, chipped tile floor, a crooked toaster with a personality holding a bowl of pancake batter like it was a peace offering. "You're overmixing it," Riley said from the stove, sipping black coffee in bare feet and a worn NYU sweatshirt that hung off one shoulder. "I'm stirring," Damon replied. "You're over-stirring. That's how you get chewy pancakes. Pancakes should be soft, gentle." He stopped, looked at the batter like it had betrayed him. I've never made pancakes. She grinned. It shows. He smirked, then handed over the bowl and stepped aside, watching her like she was some unsolvable puzzle. She moved with unthinking ease, flipping the pan handle, pouring batter with confident fingers, humming some old Etta James song under her breath. There was no artifice. No polish. Just Riley. Real. And for once, Damon didn't want to impress. He just wanted to be. Your apartment is the exact opposite of mine, he observed, glancing around. Lived in. Messy. Loud with personality. Translation. Cluttered and a fire hazard. Charming. He corrected. She flipped a pancake onto a plate and passed it to him. You're adjusting surprisingly well for someone who owns 7 homes and probably never eats anywhere that doesn't have gold-trimmed menus. I like it here, he said simply. Riley froze for a second, then looked up at him guarded, but not closed off. Why? Damon leaned against the counter, watching her. Because here, no one cares who I am. You don't care. It makes me feel he hesitated. Free. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with something more delicate. Something real. She handed him a fork. Eat your pancake before it gets cold. After breakfast, Riley had to open the bar. Damon offered to stay and help restock, but she waved him off with a kiss to the jaw that lingered longer than either of them expected. I'll see you tonight, she asked. I'll bring dinner, he replied. She smiled. No caviar. No promises. Later, back in his penthouse, Damon stood alone in his private study, a room full of curated silence, untouched books, and a desk that hadn't seen paper in years. He walked to the corner where the large canvas still stood. The cityscape painting, the one he hadn't touched since before the fake engagement became something painfully real. It looked different now. He saw things he hadn't noticed before. The harshness of the brushstrokes, the way the shadows consumed the skyline, the utter emptiness at the center of the canvas. It wasn't a city. It was a man. Alone. Forgotten. Feared. He pulled a stool from the corner, grabbed his old brushes stiff from disuse and sat. For the first time in years, he dipped the bristles into paint and began to add light. He started at the edges, a warm blush where the sky touched the buildings, a golden glimmer in one of the windows, like someone had finally come home and turned on the lights. He painted for hours. When Jack called with an update on the Lang Holdings merger, Damon let it go to voicemail. When his email pinged with press questions, he ignored them. Because for the first time, Damon wasn't creating something to control perception. He was creating something for himself. By late afternoon, he walked into Thorne Industries HQ for a mandatory internal review meeting. He hadn't been back in nearly a week, not since walking away from the Calder deal. Whitman Lang was waiting for him in the boardroom, surrounded by stone-faced directors and polished assistants. Care to explain this PR mess? Whitman snapped, tossing down a file filled with tabloid clippings and investor concern reports. Damon didn't sit. I stepped away from Calder. It was a toxic partnership, and the board's blind pursuit of it would have destabilized the foundation of our long-term equity strategy. Whitman narrowed his eyes. Don't give me a media-safe answer, Damon. You walked away because of her. Abatenda. Damon straightened. Her name is Riley Quinn. And I walked away because I finally realized this company doesn't need more control. It needs authenticity. You sound like a man in love. I am. The room stiffened. One of the younger board members cleared his throat. Are you suggesting emotional growth is part of your business strategy? I'm suggesting that losing her was the cost of how we've been operating, and I'm not willing to pay it again. Whitman scoffed. We made you, Damon. No, he said calmly. I made me. You just helped polish the glass box. Then he dropped a thick black folder onto the table. Inside, a full strategic pivot proposal. Clean energy acquisitions. Philanthropy restructuring. Diversified partnerships. No more smoke and mirrors. No more board-approved marriages. No more masks. The room was silent. Damon turned to leave. You're resigning? Whitman asked. Damon paused at the door. No, he said without looking back. I'm rebuilding. That night, Riley returned home to find a note pinned to her front door. There's a new painting in the studio. It has a window now, and a second figure on the rooftop waiting to be seen. D. She closed her eyes and smiled. Riley stood in front of Damon's painting. It was the first time she'd stepped into his private art studio, a glass-paneled room at the top of the penthouse, half forgotten by the outside world. The scent of turpentine and charcoal still lingered in the air, warm and familiar in a way that surprised her. The painting was massive, the same cityscape that had haunted her since the first time she saw it. Only now, it was different. The broken skyline was still there, but the edges were softer. The windows of the buildings glowed with amber light, and at the top of the tallest rooftop, where once there had been nothing but shadow, stood two small, painted silhouettes, one facing the horizon, the other turned toward them. Together, connected. Not perfect, but present. Riley stepped closer, breath catching in her throat. She traced the outline of the rooftop figure with her eyes and whispered, "You let someone stay." Behind her, Damon's voice was quiet. "I didn't know how to paint hope until I met you." She turned. He was standing in the doorway, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, charcoal smudged on one hand. He looked tired, but calm, the kind of tired that comes after telling the truth for once in your life. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "Not because it's polished, because it's brave." He walked toward her. Slow, measured. "It scared me to change it. That skyline has been my armor for so long." She met his gaze. "You don't need armor anymore." He nodded once. Then, like he couldn't hold it in, "The board hated everything." "Of course they did. They think I've lost control." "Have you?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But for the first time, I don't feel like I'm drowning in what I built." Riley stepped closer, arms crossing over her chest. "So what now, Damon? Are you just a new man? Better overnight?" "No," he said. "But I'm learning. Slowly. Honestly. And where do I fit into that?" He hesitated. "I don't want to control you. Or own you. Or fix you," he said. "I want to earn you, every single day, until you decide you don't want me anymore." "Wow," she murmured. "You've really gotten soft." He reached out not to pull her close, but to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Only with you." They sat on the floor of the studio for hours, backs against the wall, watching the lights of the city flicker beyond the glass. There was no pressure to talk. No need to perform. Eventually, Riley broke the silence. "You know, I could never imagine myself with someone like you." Damon looked at her. "Why?" "Because I thought men like you only knew how to take." "And now?" She smiled, tired but warm. "Now I see you know how to give. You just needed someone to teach you how." He let that sink in before asking, "And do you still want someone like me?" Riley was quiet for a beat. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder. "I don't want someone like you," she said. "I want you." The next morning, Riley made the decision. She stood behind the bar at the Velvet Fox, staring at the ancient cash register and the old photo of her grandfather behind it. The place was safe now. Hers. No one could take it from her. But she didn't want to hide in it anymore. Damon had changed everything to meet her halfway. Now it was her turn. She pulled out her old sketch pad, the one she hadn't touched since college, and flipped to a clean page. With a shaky hand and a steady heart, she wrote out a business plan header: Velvet Creative, Community Arts, and Bartending Collective. A partnership between old souls and new stories. Meanwhile, across town, Damon delivered his resignation letter to the Thorn Industries board. "I'm not walking away from the company," he said. "Just from the version of me you all required. The one who was cold, calculated, untouchable." Whitman Lang glared. "You're soft now, Thorn." "No," Damon said, folding the letter. "I'm stronger. Because I finally have something real to protect." That night, Damon showed up at the Velvet Fox with two things in his hands. A single white tulip, not a rose, not anything showy, just simple and rare, and a thin black box. Riley blinked. "Is that what I think it is?" He opened it. Inside. "A key. To the house in the Hamptons," he said. "The one you said was too quiet and too rich, and probably haunted." She raised an eyebrow. You're giving me a haunted estate? I'm giving you a choice, he said. If you ever want to get away from the noise, the press, the weight of it all, that place is ours now. Not just mine. She looked down at the key, then took it, and smiled. Chapter 9. Redemption. The bar was humming again. Not with the frenzied chaos of a Friday crowd, or the clink of rushed cocktails and impatient orders, but something softer, warmer. Laughter, low music, the gentle clatter of cutlery on mismatched plates. The velvet fox had always been alive. But tonight, it breathed differently. Deeper. Because tonight, it wasn't just a bar. It was home. Riley moved through the room in a vintage leather jacket, clipboard in hand, checking in with the staff she'd trained for months. They were sharp part bartenders, part artists. Every bottle had been hand-labeled, every cocktail infused with poetry and punch. The place felt like hers again. But better. Because now, it wasn't just about survival. It was about legacy. At the back corner booth, a table of young poets shared a bottle of house-made honey gin and passed around a notebook. A few local painters were sketching on coasters. A violinist played on the tiny platform where the jukebox used to sit. Riley looked around and whispered under her breath, "This is it." Her mother, seated near the fireplace with a glass of wine, caught her eye and nodded. Pride, clear as day. And at the door, dressed in black slacks and an open-collar shirt, stood Damon. He didn't make a scene. He didn't walk in like he owned the air. He just waited, watching her from across the room like he couldn't quite believe she was his to look at. Their eyes met, and the rest of the world hushed. 10 minutes later, she found him leaning on the bar, watching one of the mixologists pour lavender smoke from a bell jar onto a bourbon glass. "You fit in here better than I thought," Riley said, setting down 2 empty tumblers beside him. "I don't fit," he replied. "I stay." She turned, surprised by the softness in his voice. "Is this your way of asking for a job?" "I was thinking more of offering one." She tilted her head. "To me?" "To us." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of thick paper. She raised an eyebrow as he handed it over. It was a grant proposal. With her name at the top, the Velvet Collective, a nonprofit for community-run art and hospitality education. Below it, his signature. Already filed, already funded. "You gave up Calder," she whispered, "and started this?" He nodded. "Your sketches, your vision, it was already alive. I just added a framework." She blinked. "This isn't a romantic gesture." "No," he said, voice quiet. "It's the beginning of a partnership. If you'll have me." Her throat tightened. "You really don't give up, do you?" He smiled. "I gave up everything once. I'm not doing it again." Riley folded the paper, slid it into her back pocket, and leaned across the bar. "So, does this mean we're officially real now?" Damon paused, then reached into his coat again. Another item. Small, dark red velvet box. She tensed. "You said no more theatrics. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight." She arched a brow. "So what are you doing?" He opened the box. Inside, a tiny silver charm in the shape of a fox. "I'm asking you to say yes to something that has no contracts, no deadlines, no clauses." He closed the box, handed it to her. "Just us. One day at a time." Riley stared at it. This wasn't grand. It wasn't headline-worthy. It was intentional, intimate, real. She took the box. "Okay. Okay?" he asked. She smiled. "I'm saying yes." Later that night, long after the crowd had thinned and the lights had dimmed to a warm hum, Riley stood with Damon in the center of the bar, just the two of them, surrounded by echoes and soft jazz. "No cameras," she murmured, wrapping her arms around his neck. "No board members. No press. Just you," he said, pulling her closer. She looked up at him, voice low. "Remember what I said the first night we met? That you'd rather stab me with a shrimp fork than date me?" She grinned. "The other thing." He leaned in, lips brushing her ear. "You said I thought money could buy everything. And you said everything has a price. He nodded. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. You were wrong. Damon looked at her like she was the only real thing in the world. I know, he said, because you gave me something I couldn't buy. What's that? A second chance. And when he kissed her slow, deep, reverent, there was nothing fake left between them. No deals. No lease. Just love. 3 weeks later, the first sunlight of spring broke across Manhattan like a promise. Riley stood outside a quiet building on the Lower East Side, a renovated warehouse with massive windows, exposed brick, and a blank white sign that simply read, The Velvet Collective. Art. Hospitality. Community. She held a brass key in her hand and a knot in her throat. Inside, it smelled like sawdust and new beginnings. The wide-open gallery space was still under construction, half-painted walls, stacked chairs, rolled canvases in the corner. But she could already see it. Local artists teaching kids to sketch. Bartenders from old neighborhoods mentoring women re-entering the workforce. Spoken-word poetry slams under fairy lights. Real lives, rooted in creativity, purpose, and second chances. All the things Riley had once thought she'd never have. And she owed it to herself, not to Damon. But that didn't mean he hadn't played a part. God, she thought, what a ridiculous thing, falling for a man like him. But it hadn't been ridiculous. It had been terrifying, wild, inconvenient, and finally, worth it. She turned around and saw him leaning against the hood of his car across the street, coffee in hand, sunglasses hiding the glint in his eyes, but not the smile that tugged at his mouth when she met his gaze. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just waited like he always did now, letting her come to him. She crossed the street and took the coffee from his hand, sipping without a word. Caramel, she said. You remembered. I remember everything about you. Riley narrowed her eyes. That was smooth. I've had practice. They stood in silence for a minute. Cars passing, construction buzzing in the distance. Then she asked, You nervous about tonight? He glanced at her. About the keynote? No. About going back to that building, standing in front of your board, your people, as this version of you. He was quiet a moment. Then, without looking at her, I'm not nervous. I'm clear. Riley nodded slowly. Good. Because if you go up there and say some recycled corporate fluff, I swear I will stand up in the middle of your speech and throw a cocktail napkin at your face. He smiled. That's why I keep you close. That night, the grand atrium of the Thorne Foundation buzzed with anticipation. Press lined the walls. Business leaders, philanthropic giants, and cultural figureheads mingled under chandeliers. But there was only one name on everyone's lips. Damon Thorne. He hadn't spoken publicly since walking away from the Calder deal. The world wanted a statement. An explanation. A spectacle. What they got was a man in a simple black suit, walking onto the stage without a tie, without notes, and without apology. Riley sat in the third row, wearing a black dress and combat boots. She watched as he adjusted the mic. Then he spoke. I've spent the last decade learning how to build empires, he began. But I never stopped to ask if I was building something worth living in. The crowd hushed. I thought power meant being untouchable. I thought control meant success. I thought love was something you had to hide to be taken seriously. He looked directly at Riley. I was wrong. Somewhere in the room, a breath caught. I stepped away from a deal that would have made my company billions because I realized I couldn't trade truth for profit. I've been advised strongly to spin that decision, to protect my image. But the truth is, I don't care about my image anymore. A few flashes from the press gallery. I care about impact. About the legacy we leave, not in numbers, but in people, in places, in what we build when no one's watching. He stepped back from the mic and let the silence hold. Then, this isn't a rebrand. It's a rebirth. Applause erupted. Loud, unscripted, rising like thunder. But Damon only looked at one person in the room, and Riley didn't clap. She just smiled. Later, when the room thinned out and the air grew warmer with wine and jazz, Riley slipped onto the rooftop garden of the foundation building and leaned against the stone railing. City lights twinkling below. Damon found her there, as she knew he would. "That was a hell of a speech," she murmured. "You liked it?" "I didn't throw anything." "That's a win." He stepped beside her, quiet. "I meant it," he said. "Every word." She turned to face him. "I know." They were eye to eye now, the city a blur of light behind them. "I never imagined any of this," he said. She shrugged. "Me neither. I thought I'd run that bar till I died, and maybe haunt it for a few decades just to be spiteful." He smiled. "I like the idea of Ghost Riley." She softened. "I like the idea of this." They stood like that still, unafraid until Damon reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. Not a ring. Not this time. Just a silver chain, with the fox charm, and a second charm beside it, a miniature paintbrush. "I was going to wait," he said, "but I don't want to anymore." She stared at it, not blinking, not breathing. "I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. Not until you want that. I'm asking you to stay, in whatever way you can, as long as it's real." Riley reached for the necklace, her fingers trembling, and this time, this moment, she kissed him. Because no one was watching, and it still meant everything. Chapter 10. The Real Deal. The invitation was simple. A square card, thick with texture, tucked inside a deep green envelope. No gold foil. No family crest. Just 5 quiet words. "Come celebrate something real. D and R." It didn't say wedding. It didn't say engagement. Because this wasn't a performance. It was a promise. The Velvet Fox was closed for the night, its doors draped in sheer linen and hanging eucalyptus. Candles lined the bar in soft clusters. String lights hung from the rafters like constellations. The floor had been cleared for dancing, but no one was in a rush. Inside, the room pulsed with quiet joy. Not pomp, not spectacle, just intimacy. The crowd was a mix of worlds never meant to collide. Damon's board members and Riley's regulars. Philanthropists clinked glasses with poets. Journalists stood next to bartenders. Danny spun records from the old booth, while Damon's godmother Margot sipped an old-fashioned beside the jukebox and said, "Well, I'll be damned." And in the center of it all, Riley Quinn, in a dark satin dress and her combat boots, stood barefoot on the bar and raised her glass. This place was supposed to be bulldozed. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I was supposed to end up broke, single, and yelling at rude hedge fund guys for the rest of my life. Applause. Even more laughter. Instead, I fell in love with one. Cheers now. Damon stood at the edge of the bar, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on her like he hadn't stopped watching since the day she first threw whiskey in his face. Riley continued, her smile crooked. "I used to think love meant surrender. Compromise. Giving up who you are, just to keep someone who doesn't really see you. But this man, this ridiculous, brilliant, exasperating man, taught me that love, when it's real, doesn't take from you. It amplifies you." The room went still, and she raised her glass higher, to the ones we never saw coming. Every glass lifted. Every heart cracked open. Later, Damon pulled her onto the floor for a slow dance. No cameras. No choreography. Just jazz and soft footsteps, and the feel of her cheek resting against his chest. "You're wearing the boots," he murmured, swaying with her. "They're lucky. They're loud." She smiled. "So am I." He pulled back enough to look at her, brushing a thumb against her jaw. "I never thought I'd be standing in a bar with chandeliers, dancing with the only person who's ever said no to me." "Correction," she said. "The only person who meant it, and still ended up saying yes." She gave him a long look. "I didn't say yes because you asked." "No?" She shook her head. "I said yes because you changed." He leaned in. "I changed because of you." The night blurred into something dreamlike. Photos were taken on old Polaroids and clipped to string. Riley's mother cried when Damon handed her a framed photo of the original deed, with Riley's name in clean black ink. Jack made a toast so awkward and heartfelt, it earned a full standing ovation. A kid from the poetry collective wrote a love poem on a napkin and slipped it into Riley's back pocket with a wink. And through it all, Damon stayed near. Not possessive. Not performative. Present. Grounded. Real. Hours later, the party had thinned. The lights had dimmed. The music had faded to the softest hum. Riley sat alone on the bar, swinging her legs, sipping from the same chipped mug she used every morning. Damon walked up, loosened tie hanging from his neck, and placed something on the bar beside her. A velvet box. She narrowed her eyes. We said no rings tonight. It's not a ring, he said, smiling. She opened the box. Inside was a simple gold coin vintage, scratched and warm to the touch. Etched across the center were two words. No lease. She turned it over. The other side read, no exit. Her breath caught. What is this? She asked. A coin I carry with me, he said. Not to bind you, but to remind me. Of what? That I never walk away again. Her heart broke and healed in the same breath. She leaned forward, kissed his cheek, and whispered, I believe you. Then she took the coin, slid it into her bra, and grinned. Now it's mine. He laughed. Figures. As dawn crept over the city, Damon and Riley sat on the roof of the bar with a blanket around their shoulders, watching the skyline turn gold. You know, Riley said, resting her head against his. We still haven't figured out what we are. We're us, Damon said. That's enough. Yeah, she whispered. It is. The rooftop was quiet. Damon and Riley sat shoulder to shoulder, legs dangling over the edge of the building like teenagers skipping class. Below them, New York exhaled, sirens low, streetlights flickering out, the hum of taxis giving way to birdsong. It was dawn. The sky still undecided between peach and blue. Damon glanced sideways. Riley's eyes were closed, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. Her hand was on her stomach, the gold coin resting beneath her sweater. I don't want this night to end, he said quietly. Riley cracked one eye open. Then make breakfast. He grinned. I meant the metaphorical night. Oh. Then buy me more pancakes and maybe I'll give you a metaphorical morning. They sat in silence again, not heavy, not awkward, just full. Then, after a moment, Damon rose and stood in front of her, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket. What are you doing? Riley asked. He cleared his throat. You said no rings tonight. I respected that. She narrowed her eyes. But you didn't say anything about tomorrow. She blinked. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a slim rectangular box. No velvet, just a worn leather case, weathered at the edges. Old. This, he said, opening it, was my mother's. Inside was a ring, vintage, delicate, a single emerald framed by two tiny diamonds, unpolished, irregular, gorgeous. Riley didn't move. I kept it locked away for years, Damon said, because I didn't believe in the things she believed in. Faith, partnership, a life built on something other than leverage. He stepped closer, holding the box between them. But then you showed up and ruined everything. A breath of laughter slipped from her lips. You tore apart my control, challenged every rule I thought I needed to survive. And you did it without trying. You just were. He dropped to one knee. I'm not proposing because we're perfect, or because the world expects it. I'm proposing because I don't want to spend another day wondering if you'll still be here. Her heart thudded so hard she thought it might burst. I want you beside me when I fail. When I succeed, when I forget how to breathe. I want to wake up to sarcasm and black coffee and bare feet on my kitchen counter. He looked up at her. Eyes clear. No armor. Marry me, Riley Quinn. She stared. Then slowly, so slowly, she slid off the edge of the roof and knelt in front of him, hands trembling. You're a damn disaster, she whispered. I know. And I'm still mad about the lie. I know. And you're not allowed to win every argument just because you have good bone structure. He smiled. Noted. She exhaled hard, then whispered, Yes. Damon blinked. Yes? She nodded, tears rising. Yes. You beautiful, broken bastard. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was imperfect. It was real. It was right. 2 weeks later, they signed the paperwork at City Hall. No cameras. No gowns. No crowd. Just 2 signatures, one shared smirk, and a kiss so deep the clerk had to clear his throat. Afterward, Damon took her out for pancakes. And this time, she let him make the coffee. It was awful. She drank it anyway. In the months that followed, the Velvet Collective opened its doors. The bar expanded into a creative hub by day, hosting art classes, culinary training, and a youth mentorship program led by Riley and a handful of fiercely passionate staff. Riley lectured on grit, flavor profiles, and the art of a perfect pour. Damon sat in the back, sketchbook in hand, drawing her hands as she worked. They moved between worlds, boardrooms, and bar stools, fundraisers and graffiti walls, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They were a contradiction. A bartender and a billionaire. A firestorm and a fortress. But they were also a love story, one neither of them saw coming. 1 year later, on their anniversary, Riley found a letter tucked beneath her pillow. No envelope, just parchment, and Damon's sharp, deliberate handwriting. Riley, you were never part of the plan. You were the storm that blew it all apart. And in that wreckage, I found the man I was supposed to be. You didn't save me. You dared me to save myself. And now, every day I get to wake up beside you is a day I win. Forever yours, not because I bought it, but because you gave it freely. D. She held it to her chest, blinking against the tears. Then she got up, walked into the kitchen, and kissed him mid-pancake flip. I'm still keeping my last name, she said. Damon smiled. Wouldn't dare ask otherwise. And they danced barefoot on the kitchen floor, syrup burning, eggs forgotten, the city rumbling outside like applause. Because in the end, the only thing they needed was each other.